We're live. Okay. Thanks, the little guy. Hi, Princess Steps Fall. Bobblehead cat. Fall 2023, week 2. The topic is shoes. And just a quick reminder, use Princess Steps out there. Practice it, practice it, practice it. I was even practicing it with a couple of the leaders last night, and it went really well, but it takes some effort to do that. Also, next week's topic is using heart rate and effort as your exercise guideline. And so I encourage you all this week, if you're so inclined, to practice taking your heart rate, whether it's down here on the brachial area or here at the carotid area. Practice taking your heart rate. And when I send the update later this week for week 3, it's going to have a lot of information on heart rate and effort. That is one of the integral foundational parts of this whole thing, is not doing too much too soon, too fast, and having effort be your guideline. So I'm really honored to have John be speaking not once but 2 weeks in a row, because he is a true educator and he has an unbelievable, awesome way of getting the point across in a way that you can not only understand it but apply it. And it being whether it's shoes or heart rate and effort or injury prevention, he is very much a teacher at heart. Come on up.
Good evening. Welcome to week 2. We're a shoe store that does Princess Steps and have done that now. This is our 26th year of doing this here in Salem. Selling shoes, actually I sold my first pair of running shoes in the summer of 1984. It's almost 40 years ago. A lot of things have changed in running shoes, walking shoes, participants. You know, back in the late 70s, early 80s, it was, real short shorts and no shirts and go fast all the time. What has really changed in the whole world of running and in the world of shoe design is it's accessible to everybody. And that, to me, that's been the most exciting part about being in this business and being around it for all these years. It's now really a universal thing that everybody can enjoy it. Everybody can, one foot in front of the other, left, right, repeat. It's kind of simple stuff, but we want to keep you healthy and happy and keep those feet healthy and happy. The training that Susan puts together does a really good job of keeping you on a nice path of gradual increasing and getting fitter. And what we do here during the day, selling all the shoes, helps protect these things. Okay? So everybody's got 2 feet, right? Left, right, repeat them, keep going, walk, run, Princess Steps. We got to protect these, okay? Human foot has 33 different joints, over 100 ligaments, tendons, moves in a lot of different directions, okay? All the different bones need protection. So what we're trying to do, and everybody's foot isn't as perfect as this little thing is, okay? We see lots of different feet in lots of different shapes. Everybody still has the same amount of bones and joints and ligaments and tendons, but kind of how things line up is what we really look at. So step one, when you buy shoes from us, whether it's myself or Susan or the employees that Susan does a great job of training, we look at your foot. We have you stand in your socks first, okay? And as you're standing there, do you have a nice high arch? Do you have a real, I can bend this thing around. Do you have a real flat arch, real flat foot? Is this angle here, rolled forward, rolled to the inside, rolled to the outside? Okay, so kind of a quick assessment of your personal kind of foot anatomy is part of how we start choosing the right shoes for you. Okay, step 2, after you stand in your socks and we see what your arch looks like, how wide your foot is, then we're going to have you walk back and forth. Okay, on the dark part of the floor here, that's our runway. That's the princess aisle, I guess. And by doing that, we can see what happens dynamically as you're moving. Okay, so standing there, you may have a nice solid arch, and your foot looks real neutral and doesn't roll in or roll out. Okay, but as you move, some people have that big arch that flattens right out as soon as you start moving forward. Okay, some people have real flat feet. As they're standing there, not much of an arch, but as they move forward and back and we watch you, there's no movement of the foot at all. It just goes straight through. So that really, the difference of how that arch and all these metatarsal bones, okay, how they function to absorb your weight and propel you forward. And walking is propulsion, okay? Running is propulsion as well, but just the walking back and forth, we can actually see how your foot functions, okay? And in doing that, then we start looking at shoes, all right? So protecting these, keeping you healthy and happy, getting the proper fit, okay? A lot of people want to have the shoes slammed up against these toes, okay? It's got to feel snug. It's got to feel tight. They take the laces and they just pull them as tight as they can because they want that shoe to fit like a glove. That's not how shoes fit, okay? If your toes are the shoe is all the way up at the end of your toes, just like I can bend these toes on this, on this foot, all these little metatarsals at the absolute ends, those can get bruised, those can get banged up, okay? So you always want to have just enough space at the end of the shoe, we call it thumb test. You want to have about a thumb's width length between your longest toe, which some people, it's that second toe, not necessarily the first toe. It's called Morton's toe if you have that. It's about 40% of the population has a Morton's toe, okay? If you've got enough space that we could put a thumb width between the end of that long toe and the end of the shoe, that's a properly fitting walking and running shoe, okay? If you're really snug in there, everything's tied down real tight, then you put a lot of tension on top of the foot, on these bones, on the tendons that are on these bones, and all those tendons that come down your shin and into your foot. If you have shin splints, if you have issues with your lower legs hurting all the time, sometimes it's just way too much pressure on top of that foot, okay? So having enough space so that your foot can splay inside the shoe and relax inside the shoe. The shoe's not going to fall off. It has laces. We're going to make sure that it's the right fit, but actually allowing your foot to absorb the shock inside a shoe is going to help the shoe and help you stay healthy, okay? These things are amazingly designed. Yeah. 10, 12 years ago, a couple books came out, a couple studies came out, foot, right? We don't need shoes. We need to all wear stuff like this, right? The whole barefoot thing. Okay, I got a let the foot function the way it's supposed to function. Don't do anything except wear something like this, or go out in the parks and don't wear shoes at all. It didn't go so well. Okay? Trends come and go. Shoes like this come and go. So now we've kind of gone from this 10, 12 years ago to stuff like this, where there's lots of cushion, lots of movement, okay? In all the years that we've been around the business, we see cycles, we see things change, try and make sense of them. Some of them I agree with, some of them I question. Lots of years of experience kind of gives me that, I guess, wisdom of it. I don't know, it's a pretty good idea in the lab, but is it going to work after hundreds and hundreds of miles of walking and running? So there's a lot of testing that takes place. There's a lot of marketing that takes place. Sometimes an idea comes out that tends to be far more fashionable than function. And shoe companies sell lots and lots of shoes because they're fashionable, but they're not shoes that we typically are going to sell to walkers and runners. Okay. So I'm going to kind of do a little show and tell here, explain a few things about shoes. So we didn't sell this exact shoe when we first opened in 1997, but we did sell a few things that looked pretty comparable to this. Sauconys look like this, Brooks look like this, New Balance look like this, okay? This material was called polyurethane. It was brick hard. It did soften up after about 100 or 150 miles. So you literally had to break a shoe like this in, okay? It wasn't you just went on, you put the shoe on and you went out and did 3 or 4 or 5 miles. You know, you did 3 or 4 or 5 miles on something like this, you were sore the next day. But it would soften up a little bit and you'd sink down into it. So what I'm going to do is pass this around. This is kind of circa mid-90s, all right, to where we're at now. And I want you to really feel the difference, you know, just pass these around. Feel the weight difference in these. Yes, they both look like they have lots of cushion, okay? You know, visibly, that leg look like that. But you'll see a whole lot. Oh, yes, Susan. I guess I can put this up too. This is what our shoe wall looked like 26 years ago.
We can pass that around too.
I'll pass that too. So, just take a look. We'll whip those around the room. So the shoe that I'm passing around with that old one is a Hoka. Everybody heard of Hoka? Okay. If I asked that question 4 years ago, you'd have no idea what I was talking about. Okay. Unless you were really kind of into shoes. Hoka as a brand came on the scene about 11 years ago, 11, 12 years ago. We were one of the first stores in the state of Oregon to carry them. Another brand that came on about the same time was called Ultra. All right. So Hoka, you know, definitely the big, cushy, lightweight foam. And Ultra is, okay. Ultra likes the idea of foot shaped. Okay, so you can see we got the skeletal bones of a foot and kind of the bottom of this Ultra shoe looks pretty similar. Okay, so kind of two opposite competing brands jump into this whole mix with, you know, the standards of Brooks and Asics and New Balance and Nike and Adidas and these, you know, the brands Hoka and Ultra look so vastly different than anything else on the wall. Took a few years for those brands to catch on, but there's an awful lot of science that went into the design of Hoka, a lot of the science that went into the design of Ultra. They just started looking at things a little bit differently. Ultra, very much so, looking at the foot. The shoe is a little bit wider in the forefoot, narrow in the heel. Wow, that's what a foot looks like, right? Narrow in the heel, wider up here. So, you know, a design that kind of came out of the back, honestly, the back room of a shoe store in Utah is kind of where Ultra got its start. And, you know, shoe geeks, they're all over the place. When we first opened, we used to know almost all the shoe geeks in the country, because there were only, in 1996, 97, there were only about 350 or so stores nationwide like ours. Now there's about 1,700. So we don't know everybody anymore, but we used to. So anyway, that concept of having a shoe shaped like a foot and cushioned like a foot and flat, so the heel and the forefoot are both at the same level. Okay, very different idea. It caught on. Other shoe brands started, we should maybe lower the heel a little bit. We should have things a little more natural. All right. So kind of the evolution, I guess, of going from barefoot, no cushion on the ground, to lots of cushion, to something in between, but keeping in mind how the foot functions and how the foot works. Those are the things that are starting that have been happening now for the last 5 or 6 years in the industry.
So what's the advantage of having it be flat? Seems like if you had a high arch, that might be a problem.
The concept on their shoes is if you're walking barefoot, your heels aren't higher when you're walking.
Yeah.
And clarification, just because that's level doesn't mean there isn't arch support. There's still arch support in there.
Mm-hmm.
When it's flat, think of level. If your feet are barefoot on the floor, your feet are level. So that's what they're calling it, is level cushioning. But there's still arch support in there. You'd be kind of surprised how much arch support there is.
So, and then, was it 4 years ago now, 5 years ago? Let's put carbon fiber in shoes, okay? World records were set because there's a plate in here. So the shoe doesn't flex, okay? This thing just propels you forward and propels you forward quickly, okay? Trend? I don't know. It's expensive shoes for sure. All these things that have the carbon plates in them, and pretty much every brand's doing it now. You're talking $180 to $250 a shoe, or a pair of shoes. $180 to $250. But there's people like we had, you know, the Ironman, half Ironman, was here in town last month. Boy, they buy a lot of these shoes, okay, because they want to go fast. They've trained a long time. They spend a lot of money on their bikes. They spend a lot of money on their shoes too. So not a shoe that's, you may see a lot of stuff that's advertised about this. Nike has a version. This is the New Balance version. Hoka's got a version. Pretty much everybody now has one shoe in their line that's got a carbon plate in it. I'll pass this around this direction. Try and bend that thing. Those really are a race day shoe. They're not for day in and day out training. Definitely not something you're going to want to wear around all day long. If you've got a job where you're on your feet all day long, that would be a nightmare after about 2 hours. Okay, but it is designed to go fast and decrease your times. But in between, we've got stuff like what ASICS is now coming out with, kind of similar to what the Hoka midsole looks like, but a real lightweight shoe. I happen to have one pair of these on right now. But same thing, lots of cushion, lots of foam underneath, but very lightweight. Okay, send that one When do you replace your shoes? Well, you replace them far before you get to this point. Okay, these are actual shoes that people, this a few years ago, but people brought in saying, my shins seem to be hurting. It's like, yeah. Shoes that look like that, it's easy to tell. Hey, the complete bottom has been worn off. They must be toast. Okay. Especially with all these new foams, these lightweight, materials now, you really don't know by looking at the outside whether or not they're worn out. What happens is that midsole material just starts compressing, and I mean, think of like a brand new pillow that's nice and fluffy, and then it's little by little it gets harder and harder, and firmer, and shorter. That's kind of the same idea on this. We've heard a lot of people over the last few years, like, why did they change shoes so much? How many people play golf or tennis? Here, anybody? Okay. If you're a golfer, if you're a tennis player, I mean, even pickleball, okay? Pickleball rackets have changed dramatically just in the last 3 years, okay? The whole thing is technology, right? So running, just like bicycles, just like tennis rackets, golf clubs, things like that, there's a lot of technology that's being thrown into the shoes and trying to make things lighter, faster, better, okay? Also, there's an awful lot of brand and manufacturing awareness of what's the environmental cost of making shoes. And that polyurethane shoe that Rick that was passing around, a lot of environmental cost to a shoe like that. Shoes like that can't be made in America because of all the laws. So there's an awful lot of things like that affect how shoes are manufactured and where shoes can be manufactured. Okay. I mentioned the human foot, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned, that getting to that point, we really need to change our shoes. We need to get some new ones. But if we cannot really see the wear and tear just by looking at them, how do we know?
Pretty much any of them. Thank you. That's what I was going to go to after I talked about that. So thanks for the reminder. About 300 to 400 miles is the life of that midsole material, okay, where it's going to start compressing. After about 400 miles or so, there's not much of that cushion left, okay? And people think, 400 miles, that's forever. Well, if you're doing, figure 10 miles a week, okay, that's less than a year. If you're pushing a shoe for a whole year, you're pushing it well past its lifestyle, its life. Okay.
Well, in addition, it depends partially on the structure of the shoe to begin with. Because we call them bread and butter training shoes. Yeah, 350, maybe 300, because the engineers are making those shoes so much lighter than they used to be. And so if you take one of the shoes that's in our lightweight / racing category, you may be lucky to get 250 miles out of those shoes. They're not going to last as long. They weren't engineered to last very long. So part of it depends on, Teresa, how you're feeling. You start to feel some issues in your feet, your shins, your knees. That's the time to come in and try on a new pair before you're in dire straits and compare the old ones with the new pair. And oftentimes you put the new pair on and it's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea these were so worn out. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about squirrel too, but maybe that's another story.
Yes, it is. Well, we get done in 5 minutes. So, basic shoes there's an awful lot of stuff that goes into the marketing and talking about all the different shoes, but still the number one shoe by far in the industry is the Brooks Ghost, especially for women. Number one, no other shoe is close to the Brooks Ghost in terms of overall sales nationwide. When Susan said a bread and butter shoe, this is the shoe that pretty much all the brands are like, they're going to go for the scientific, woo-woo stuff that's really cool, and lots of articles are written about, but every brand needs a shoe like this, and it's what actually makes the money for all the brands. Just the basic shoes.
What about for high-end stuff? Because I have a really high arch in my foot. It's like that. What would you recommend for someone with that?
That's where different brands come into play. We talk about the volume of the shoe, where a lot of some shoes are real narrow and shallow in the forefoot. What we would be looking at is a shoe that has more volume, and there's about 8 different shoes on the wall. If we looked at your foot, did that first assessment, wow, you got big high instep, a high talus bone. That's where the structural differences. We all have the same amount of bones, but they're different shapes. Okay, so we take that into account, and then we'll pull the shoes that are going to give you that volume on top.
Also, sometimes we go to a wide to accommodate that volume.
Right.
So if you tie your shoe and the tongue area, it's called the vamp, but the tongue area looks more like a V because you can't lace it tight enough versus parallel, that's usually an indication you might need to go to wide. At least try wide.
Yeah, and we've stocked plenty of wides and across all brands. So we're going to hold up these shoes kind of as comparables. So the Brooks Addiction and the Brooks Ghost, okay, 2 very large sellers for years and years for us. The Addiction, I don't know if people can see this guardrail, as I call it now. For years, a lot of shoes had extra, a denser foam, a denser rubber under the foot to support the arch. So if you have feet that pronate, feet that roll in, your arch collapses to the inside. So a shoe like this is going to be a stability shoe. It's also, as you can see, a little bit broader on the bottom, so more surface space, okay, versus something like this, not quite as much surface space under the arch. Okay. Kind of see that difference between those two? Okay. So again, across every brand, whether it's Nike or New Balance, Saucony, Brooks, Hoka, Asics, Ultra, everybody's got different shoes, and that's where we come into play, and our staff comes into play of, the Addiction with that extra surface space, higher volume, a little bit broader foot versus, more kind of standard tapered foot. Okay.
There's also the mush test.
Right. Also, other things, trail shoes. So these shoes, see the bottoms, kind of very aggressive. So if you're out in gravel, mud, you're going up to Silver Creek Falls or down to McDonald Forest, or really getting out on the trails. So this extra material, or the teeth, kind of on here. The only thing about a trail shoe is it's kind of like driving studded tires, during the summer. You're going to feel this on concrete, on asphalt, because of those extra lugs. But in dirt, in mud, in snow, in gunky conditions, these are going to grab, and you're not going to slip. Okay. So if you want one pair of shoes that you want to do trail and you want to do road, there's kind of in between shoes that we've got a couple of different options. But pretty much a trail shoe, if you wear them on the roads, you're going to wear them out a whole lot faster. Okay. One other thing about feet is Each foot has about 250,000 sweat glands. Okay, so socks are really, really important. Breathable shoes are really important. Okay, all the shoes that we sell are engineered mesh, designed so that they can breathe, so that the air gets, the heat that's built up in your foot, in a shoe, can escape.
Unless it's waterproof.
Yeah. The average temperature of a foot in a shoe while exercising is about 114 degrees. Okay. It's hotter than that down in Arizona now, but so let's figure out how much sweat in 1 hour you're going to get in 1 foot. Okay, that's about 200 milliliters of sweat. That's 1 foot. Okay, so good socks, breathable shoes, very important. All right. Hopefully that wasn't too much of an ick factor for people. And you see an awful lot of the socks that we sell. Yeah, it's got all kinds of fancy colors and stuff on it, but these are all different yarns where there's areas that are going to allow heat to escape. There's areas where there's more cushion. You can see the heel here. Definitely way more cushion in the heel and the forefoot where the most impact is. Got the whole sock wall there. Thick socks, thin socks, tight fitting socks, looser fitting socks. A lot of it's really what your personal preference is, but socks are very important in helping the shoe work correctly.
I just got to get a quick shout out to Vicky in Texas. Thanks, Vicky. She said in Texas, so she's watching us live.
Yeah.
Hi, Vicky.
100 plus there too. And then inserts. These are some Superfeed inserts, and Curex is another brand that we carry. So, got some support and extra cushion in there. So, do you need an insert in every single shoe? No, not necessarily. What inserts do and how we sell them is to enhance the fit. If you do have some injury issues or some biomechanical things or structural anatomical things, bunions, some breakdown in tissue and tendons and ligaments in the foot, that's where something like this comes into play. Unfortunately, there are stores out there that will not let you get out the door unless you buy inserts with the shoes. We don't really believe that. It helps if you need it, not necessary for everybody. Last thing I'm going to talk about is UFOs. Okay, recovery footwear. This is not your $9.99, flip-flop shower slipper. All right. The idea on this again is that super lightweight foam. You sink down into it, nice high arch here. Recovery footwear, and it actually works quite well. There's an awful lot of stuff that we get introduced to as store owners that you're like, really? Come on. But this is one of those, yeah, really, come on. It's amazing what this brand has done. It does allow your foot to recover, your muscles to recover, your legs to relax after exercise. Pretty much have I don't have pink ones like this, but
Absorbs 37% more impact than traditional foams.
yeah. So pretty much every morning out of bed and every night, even though I wear comfortable running shoes every day, I still put a pair of the UFOs on every day. So it really works. Any questions?
How to care for your shoes? All that sweat.
Like I said, keep them breathable. Water and maybe some hand soap or like dishwashing soap is probably one of the better things. do not put them in a washer or dryer, because all of these materials are glued together. But the agitator of a washer, definitely you want to keep them away from heat. If you're going to be kind of in a hot area where the shoes are going to be shoved in your trunk and it's going to be, 140 degrees in the trunk of your car, that's going to break the shoes down. So washing them, definitely a hand wash or a brush, let them air dry. They will dry pretty quickly. They're designed for that.
Another question somewhere?
So, in regards to the shoe inserts, I was just at the podiatrist because feet been hurting and stuff, so
Yeah.
they got me into some shoe inserts. My chiropractor wanted to get me into some shoe inserts also. And then you have the Good Feet store, and then you have these ones. Is there any difference amongst them? Aside from the podiatrist, those were prescribed, but when I saw them, when they gave them to me, I'm like, these are just like those box ones that I'm paying triple or quadruple.
The difference is over the counter, like these are going to be pretty much a standard sizing and standard fit. And we work very closely with all the podiatry offices here in town, and a lot of physical therapy offices, a lot of physicians in town. When they cast your foot or take a mold of your foot, that's your foot. It isn't this general size that's going to fit 80% of feet. So that's where there's a vast difference. And pretty much since day one, all these years that we've been doing this, we don't have the medical degrees. We have the shoe degrees. We know what the shoes are, we know what the inserts are, but we're always going to defer. And we've had plenty of times where we've either had the customer call the office, or we've actually called an office. And personally, we know a bunch of the podiatrists in town. So over the years, we've kind of developed, when they say this is what they're coming in looking for.
I'm going to put a little more into that. If you've never had an insert and you're being prescribed an insert from different, various different sources, but you've never tried an over-the-counter prefabricated one, then you could go that more conservative route. Try an over-the-counter prefabricated one and see how it works. If it works, it was only $55. If it doesn't work, then you're only out $55, and you can go to the podiatrist or whoever your medical professional is and say, I've tried 2 or 3 different over-the-counter prefabricated ones and they don't seem to work. Then you might be a better candidate for that custom one. But if they don't custom make it, you might as well try one that's $55 instead of $800, because you're still not guaranteed that $400 to $800 one is going to work. So hope that helps answer your question.
I'll just tag on to that. I have terrible feet, just terrible feet, and I've done all kinds of stuff to make it so my feet don't hurt, and that's what I did. I wear inserts all the time, and I started with the over-the-counter, and it worked for me. So I was like, okay, I'm good, And if it doesn't work anymore, then I'll go to the next step. But I've been doing those over-the-counters for years.
I think a lot of people, when their feet hurt, you're not happy when your feet aren't happy. So a lot of times people's first thinking is go to the doctor, go to a podiatrist. And of course they might say, yeah, you need custom ones. Well, wait a minute, maybe you just need to start with good shoes. Because if you put a $800...
Or a half size bigger.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. If you put a very
That
expensive,
has made feet feel better almost instantly.
if you put a very expensive orthotic into a very low quality shoe, let's say, that maybe you just need to start with, because you need a good shoe anyway.
Yeah.
That's going to support you better. So that's just to consider, a perspective.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Got to get
Great
you guys
question.
outside. So. Okay. Thanks for listening. Have a great evening.